The summer that Amara Eloise Johnson turned 18. The heat in Biloxi, Mississippi sat on your chest like a sleeping dog, warm and heavy and not altogether unpleasant if you had nowhere to be. Amara had somewhere to be. She always did. While the rest of Cypress Lane melted into lawn chairs and sweet tea and the slow religion of summer afternoons, Amara sat on the porch steps with a Korean language workbook balanced on her knees, her pencil moving in careful strokes, her lips forming sounds that had no business being born in the Mississippi heat. Annyeonghaseyo, Jianyin Amara Imnida. She had been teaching herself Korean since she was 14, the year she stayed up past midnight watching a documentary about Seoul, and felt something open in her chest like a window she hadn't known was closed. It wasn't just the lights of the city, though those were extraordinary, towers of glass and neon reflecting themselves in the Han River like a second city built on water. It wasn't just the food, though her stomach ached watching the documentary host eat tteokbokki from a street cart at 2 in the morning. It was something harder to name, a sense that the world was far larger than Cypress Lane, than Biloxi, than the flat and familiar geography of everything she had always known, and that somewhere out there was a version of her life she hadn't yet grown into. She downloaded language apps. She borrowed library books. She found a Korean tutor online, a college student in Busan who charged $10 an hour and laughed warmly at Amara's southern accented pronunciation but never unkindly. By 16, she could hold a conversation. By 17, she was reading novels. By 18, she had applied for 11 scholarships and been accepted to one program so far beyond what she dared to hope for that she read the email 3 times before she let herself believe it. Hansung University, Seoul, South Korea. Full academic scholarship. International Studies program. She screamed. She ran into the backyard barefoot. Her father, Clarence Johnson, a broad-shouldered man with graying temples and a laugh you could hear from the street, came running with a garden hose still in his hand, thinking something was wrong. When she showed him the email on her phone, he dropped the hose entirely. He picked her up off the ground. She was 18 years old, nearly his height, and he picked her up like she was 6, and held her while she laughed and cried at the same time. "That's my baby," he said into her hair, squeezing tight. "Lord have mercy. That is my baby girl." Her mother, Ruth Johnson, a small and precise woman who wore her faith like a second skin, sat down at the kitchen table and wept quietly into her dish towel, which was her way of expressing the kinds of joy that exceeded ordinary expression. Later that night she made Amara's favorite meal. Smothered chicken, collard greens, cornbread so tender it fell apart if you looked at it wrong, and the 4 of them, Amara and her parents and her older sister Destiny, ate together with all the windows open and the summer coming through. Destiny was 20 years old that summer, and beautiful in the way of things that know their own power. She had their mother's cheekbones and their father's stubbornness and a quality of stillness that could feel like patience or calculation depending on the day. She and Amara were not enemies. They loved each other in the complicated and sometimes bruising way of sisters who are too different to understand each other and too close to stop trying. Destiny thought Amara was too soft, too dreamy, too willing to believe in things. Amara thought Destiny was too sharp, too guarded, too quick to treat the world like a negotiation. They were probably both right. That night at dinner, Destiny raised her glass of sweet tea across the table. "You're going to be brilliant," she said. There was something genuine in it, something unguarded in a way Destiny rarely allowed herself to be. "Don't let anybody over there make you feel small." Amara clinked her glass against her sister's. "Never." She left in September. The whole family drove to the airport in their father's old Buick, her mother sitting in the back with Amara and holding her hand the whole way without speaking. At the gate, her father straightened her collar the way he had done since she was small, smoothing it down with both hands even though it wasn't wrinkled, because it was something to do with his hands when he didn't want her to see his face. Her mother pressed a small leather Bible into her palms, the one that had lived on the nightstand since before Amara was born, its spine cracked and its margins full of Ruth Johnson's careful handwriting. "Carry it," her mother said simply. "I will, Mama." Even Destiny hugged her properly that day, holding on a beat longer than usual. "Don't forget where you come from," she said into Amara's shoulder. "I never could," Amara said. Seoul received her like a secret it had been keeping. The airport alone was larger than anything she had seen. Corridors of polished light, signs in Hangul she could actually read, the electric hum of a city that never fully slept. She took the train to the university and watched the landscape change outside the window. The farmland giving way to suburbs, giving way to the stacked, luminous enormity of the city rising up around her like a dream that had outgrown her sleeping mind. She arrived at her dormitory, a small but clean room on the 4th floor with a window looking out over the Han River, and sat on the edge of the narrow bed for a long time, alone for the first time in her life in the way that is different from ordinary aloneness, the way that is also freedom. She put her mother's Bible on the nightstand. She opened her Korean workbook. She began. University was hard in the way she had wanted hard, demanding, stimulating, full of ideas that arrived in her mind like weather, changing the interior landscape by the time they'd passed through. Her professors were rigorous. Her classmates were from 20 different countries. She stumbled through her first Korean conversation with a professor and flushed red from collar to hairline. Then tried again. And again. She made friends slowly, the way she'd always made friends. Not by performing warmth but by simply being present, consistently and quietly, until people began to look for her when she wasn't there. She found a small restaurant in the Itaewon neighborhood owned by an African-American woman from Atlanta named Ms. Brenda who made something approximating her mother's cornbread and played old soul records on a turntable behind the counter. She went there on hard days and ate in comfortable silence and felt a little less far from home. She met Marcus Webb in November of her first year. A tall, easygoing boy from Atlanta doing a business exchange program, who appeared at the seat beside her in the university library one evening and announced, in a whisper, that he could not understand a single word of what he was reading and did she speak Korean and could she possibly help him. She helped him. He came back the next evening. He brought coffee the evening after that. Marcus was uncomplicated in the best sense of the word. He laughed easily. He was kind without making a performance of it. He brought her ramen when she studied late and teased her about her Mississippi accent and told her she was one of the most interesting people he had ever met with the direct simplicity of someone who only said what they meant. She saved his number under my Marcus Blackheart. She wasn't sure what they were to each other. Not quite a couple, not quite not. But he was her warmth in a city that could be very cold, and she was grateful for him. She video called her parents every Sunday without fail. Her father told her about the shipyard, about his co-workers, about the tomatoes he was growing in the backyard. Her mother read her a verse and asked if she was eating enough and prayed softly over the phone. Amara sat by her window with the Han River below and felt the particular sweetness of missing a place because you love it, not because it is all you have. She was happy. For one full, real, unqualified year, she was happy. The last call she had with her parents was on a Sunday evening in October. Golden light, her father in his yard clothes, her mother in the background calling out that the chicken was ready. Her father laughed about something a coworker had said. Her mother asked if she was staying warm. They said they were proud of her. They said they loved her. They said they'd talk next Sunday. There was no next Sunday. Her Auntie Clarice called at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. "Baby," her aunt said, in a voice Amara would hear for the rest of her life in the moments just before sleep. "Baby, I need you to sit down." A truck driver on Interstate 10. A retirement party. A road they had driven 100 times. Clarence and Ruth Johnson were gone, and Amara was 6,000 miles away, and the window she had loved, the one that looked out over the Han River, felt suddenly and irreversibly like a wall. She came back to Mississippi for the funeral. Biloxi in November is gray and wind-stripped, the gulf of flat and churning pewter beyond the highway. The cemetery sat on a low rise on the edge of town, its grass yellowed and its iron gate gone to rust in the salt air. Amara stood between two fresh graves in her good black dress and felt the cold move through her like a second loss. Not the warmth of summer grief but something bleak and oceanic, the kind of grief that has no visible shore. The church community came, of course. The neighborhood came. The men from the shipyard stood in a row with their hats in their hands, large and uncomfortable in their sorrow. Ms. Violet from next door brought 2 casseroles and wept openly. The pastor said the right things in the right order. Amara received hugs and clasped hands and whispered condolences until her face ached from holding itself together. Destiny moved through it all beautifully. She organized, she received people, she spoke to the pastor. She wore a black dress and oversized sunglasses and cried in the appropriate moments. But Amara noticed, in the distant and mechanical way she noticed everything that day, that Destiny stepped away from the reception twice, out to the side yard, phone in hand, and came back each time with a different quality of composure, as though the call had steadied her in some way that the people inside the house could not. Amara said nothing. People grieve in strange ways. She had no room for suspicion inside the enormity of what she was carrying. The family's financial reality was laid out for them by the estate attorney 3 days after the funeral. A slight, apologetic man with a yellow legal pad who delivered the numbers with the careful neutrality of someone delivering a diagnosis. There was a mortgage on the house, not large but persistent. There was minimal savings. The life insurance policy had a clause their father had not fully understood when he signed it years ago, and the deaths in a traffic accident with an uninsured driver fell into a gap that the policy did not cover in the way their father had believed it would. There was the truck. There was furniture. There was the leather Bible on the nightstand. There was not much else. Amara sat in the attorney's office and did the arithmetic of her life. She had a full scholarship that covered tuition. She had a dormitory placement that was separate from tuition but manageable, barely, with careful living. She had no other income. She had a degree she was 1 year from completing, a degree her father had wept over, a degree that was the shape of everything they had sacrificed for her. Destiny reached over and covered her hand. "Go back," she said. "Finish it. I'll handle things here. I'll send money every month. Not a lot, but enough to cover the gaps. You just focus on school. You finish what you started. Daddy would lose his mind if you quit now." Amara looked at her sister, at the cheekbones and the familiar eyes and the certainty in her voice. "You promise." "On everything," Destiny said. "On Mama and Daddy both. I promise." Amara went back to Seoul. The money arrived for 2 months, then late for 1, then half with a text message explaining that things were tight, that Destiny had a car payment, that she'd make it up next month. Then nothing. Just silence followed by shorter and shorter responses to Amara's careful, non-accusatory texts. "Things are rough right now. I haven't forgotten. Soon." Then no responses at all. Marcus was gone by January. A family situation back in Atlanta, a visa complication, the logistics of a life lived in 2 places simultaneously collapsing under their own weight. They still texted, but the time difference was wide and the emotional distance was widening with it, slowly and without cruelty, the way some things simply fade. Amara picked up every legal form of income the university would allow. She tutored undergraduate students in English, then in essay structure, then in general academics for whoever would pay her the small hourly rate she charged. She took a weekend job at a convenience store near campus whose owner, an older Korean man named Mr. O, was kind and asked no questions about why she looked so tired. She structured her grocery shopping around what was on sale and what would stretch furthest, and she became expert at making a single pot of something last 3 days. She stopped going to Ms. Brenda's restaurant. She couldn't afford to. She lost weight in the gradual, undramatic way that comes not from illness but from persistent scarcity. Her clothes began to fit differently. The warmth that had lived in her face, that round, open quality her father used to call her sunshine, dimmed by degrees so subtle that no individual day felt like a turning point, only the accumulated distance from what she had been. In February, she came home from a tutoring session to find a formal notice slipped under her dormitory door. She owed 3 months of housing fees. She had 30 days before her placement would be reviewed. If placement was revoked, she would have no legal accommodation on campus, and university rules prohibited continuing enrollment without a registered address in the housing system. She sat on the floor of her room. It was 9 o'clock and she hadn't eaten since a piece of bread and an egg at 7 that morning, and let herself feel, fully and without resistance, how bad it actually was. She was 20 years old and 8 months, from her degree and 6,000 miles from what remained of her family, and she could not pay her rent and she was hungry, and there was a quality to her loneliness that had become structural, load-bearing, something the whole architecture of her daily life was now built around. She picked up her phone. She opened her messages. She scrolled to My Marcus Blackheart. Because she needed to tell someone, needed to say it out loud to a person who knew her, even a person who was far away and could do nothing about it. And she typed the message from the floor of her dim room with her back against the bed and her knees drawn up. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. I'm so tired. I'm scared. I don't have enough for rent. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. I just miss my parents so much and I feel like I'm disappearing." She pressed send. She put the phone face down on the floor and cried into her knees, quietly, the way she had learned to cry so that her neighbors in the thin-walled dormitory would not hear her. After a while, she picked the phone back up. She looked at the screen. No response from Marcus. The message showed as delivered but not read. She frowned, looked closer at the contact name at the top of the conversation thread. The name read, M, wrong number, ignore. She scrolled back, confused, searching for the moment the thread changed. She had saved a wrong number months ago, given to her by a classmate who had misremembered the study group coordinator's digits. She had meant to delete it. She hadn't. And somehow, in the fatigue and the darkness and the unsteady hands of a person who hasn't eaten properly in 2 days, she had scrolled one contact too far and sent the most private thing she had ever written to a stranger in Seoul. She stared at the screen. The message sat there, delivered. Read. A small read receipt appearing beneath it. Her stomach dropped. She typed quickly, I'm so sorry, wrong number. Please disregard. Very sorry to bother you. Sage. He put the phone down. Her heart was hammering. She told herself it was nothing. A stranger with an unknown number. They would roll their eyes and move on. It meant nothing. She was wrong. Kim Jae-won read the message 3 times in the back of his car. He was returning from a meeting in Gangnam that had lasted 2 hours longer than necessary, which had put him in the particular quality of cold mood that his staff had learned to move quietly around. He was 34 years old and he ran an empire, the kind that appeared in financial news as a constellation of respectable companies and appeared in other, less public conversations as something considerably more formidable. Real estate, private equity, hotels with lobbies that felt like small countries. And beneath all of that, woven into it so thoroughly that separating one from the other would have been like separating river water from the river, the network that had made his family feared and respected in equal measure since before he was born. He was not a sentimental man. He was not a man who was moved by things. He looked at the profile image attached to the contact. A small, candid photograph. A young black woman with natural hair pulled to one side, sitting by a window with a book in her hands, soft afternoon light falling across her face. She was looking slightly away from the camera, her expression unposed and unguarded, open in a way that struck him as almost disorienting. In his world, everyone performed something: confidence, indifference, competence, threat. He had not seen a face that simply was in longer than he could remember. He read the message again. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. Something moved in him, small and quiet, but there. He looked up at his operations director, Sung-min, who sat across from him in the vehicle reviewing documents on a tablet with the focused expression of a man who had learned not to notice things he wasn't asked about. Sung-min. Sir. This number. He turned the phone screen to face him briefly, then pulled it back. I want a full profile. Name, location, university enrollment, financial situation, living arrangements. Tonight. Sung-min noted it without expression. Understood. Jae-won looked out at the city moving past the window. Seoul at 10 p.m., electric and relentless, indifferent to everything beneath its surface. He looked at the photograph one more time. Then he looked away and said nothing else for the rest of the drive. Amara woke the next morning to a knock on her dormitory door at 8 o'clock. She opened it, still in her sleeping shirt and headscarf, expecting a neighbor or a courier with someone else's package. Instead, she found a young man in an expensive-looking dark coat standing in the hallway with a large canvas bag in one hand and a white envelope in the other. He was Korean, mid-20s, with the expressionless precision of someone professionally trained to be unreadable. He bowed slightly. Miss Amara Johnson? She gripped the door frame. Yes. These are for you. He extended both items with both hands, the way things are offered when the offering is meant to be taken seriously. From someone who wishes you to be well. Inside the canvas bag. Groceries, rice, vegetables, fruit, eggs, several containers of prepared food still warm from wherever they had come from, 2 kinds of tea, honey, and what appeared to be fresh bread from a bakery whose name she didn't recognize but whose smell made her eyes sting with something close to tears. Inside the envelope, a money transfer confirmation. Enough to cover her 3 months of overdue housing fees with a sum remaining that would carry her comfortably through the end of the semester. There was no personal note. Just a number, the same number she had accidentally texted the night before. She looked up. The young man in the dark coat was already walking back down the hallway with the quiet efficiency of someone who had completed a task exactly as directed and needed nothing in return. "Wait!" she called. "Who is this from? What's his name?" The young man paused without turning around. "He will introduce himself when he's ready," he said. And then he was gone. Amara spent 2 days in a state of sustained unease, eating the food and hating herself a little for how much comfort it brought her, trying to determine what kind of person received a wrong number text from a stranger and responded by paying that stranger's rent. She asked her classmate Sujin, who had given her the wrong number in the first place, if she recognized the digits. Sujin looked at the number, frowned, and said she had no idea but that it clearly wasn't the study group coordinator's number, and sorry about that. And also the number prefix was registered to a private line, which was unusual. On the third day, she was walking out of the university library in the late afternoon and she heard her name. It was spoken quietly, not called out but placed, the way you set something down with care, and she turned to find a man standing at a distance of several meters, wearing a dark coat, very still, watching her. He was tall, sharp-jawed, dark-eyed, perhaps mid-30s, handsome in the way of things that are also slightly alarming, the kind of face that has been organized by some combination of genetics and discipline into something close to symmetry. He did not smile. He held himself with a stillness that was clearly not the absence of energy but the mastery of it. Everything directed inward, calibrated. He said, in clear and careful English with a Korean accent that he didn't seem to be trying to conceal. "You texted me. By mistake." She gripped her bag strap with both hands. "I know. I apologized for that." "You did." He looked at her steadily. "Are you all right?" She hadn't expected the question. Its directness stopped her like something stepping into a doorway. "I'm managing," she said. "You said you hadn't eaten since the previous morning. That was a private message." "Yes," he said. "I know. I apologize for reading it." He did not look particularly apologetic, but the words were said with sincerity, which she found more interesting than performed remorse would have been. "My name is Kim Jae-won." She searched the name for recognition and found none. Later, she would understand what that absence meant, that his name existed in registers she had not yet learned to read. "Amara," she said. "I know," he said. Then, when she reacted, "I had you looked into. I understand why that's alarming. I did it because I wanted to know that you were safe before I made contact. I don't expect you to accept that reasoning without question." She stared at him for a long moment. "You had me looked into." "Yes. That is alarming." "Yes," he agreed. She had half a dozen reasonable responses to this information, and she was aware that walking away was among them. But there was something about the way he said yes plainly without deflection that made her stay. She was 20 years old and she had spent the past several months in a landscape of evasion and broken promises and people who said soon and I promise and you know I'd never, and here was a man who said yes when the honest answer was yes. "Why did you pay my housing fees?" she asked. "Because you needed them paid," he said. "And I could pay them. That's not a reason to help a stranger." He considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "It should be," he said finally. He asked her to dinner. She declined twice before accepting, telling herself the third time that declining again would have been pride performing as self-protection, and she had used up her quota of self-destructive pride sometime around the second month of skipping meals. The restaurant he chose was small and quiet and by the river, not the kind of place that announced itself loudly, but the kind that had a regular table already set when you arrived and staff who moved with the particular attentiveness of people in the orbit of someone important. She noticed it. She filed it. She didn't ask yet. He was not what she expected. She had built a version of him in her mind in the 3 days since the groceries arrived. Some combination of eccentric wealthy philanthropist and possible danger. But the man across the table was more complicated than any version she'd constructed. He was formal, controlled, occasionally awkward in a way he covered quickly. He asked more questions than he answered. He listened with the focused, complete attention of someone for whom listening was a practiced skill, which she found both impressive and slightly unnerving. He asked about Mississippi. She told him about the house on Cypress Lane, the fireflies, the smell of her mother's kitchen. He didn't offer sympathy he didn't mean, and he didn't change the subject when she mentioned her parents in the past tense. He just received it and held it and asked her what her father was like. She told him about the singing through the walls and the garden tomatoes and the way he straightened her collar before she left for Korea. And she looked out at the river while she talked, and when she turned back she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't fully name. She asked about him carefully, by degrees. He answered what he chose to and deflected what he chose to, but the deflections were obvious rather than deceptive, which she respected. He told her he was in business. She asked what kind. He said several kinds. She held his gaze and said the dangerous kind, and he looked at her steadily and said to some people, yes. She asked if she was some people. He was quiet for a moment that stretched out long and considered. I don't want you to be, he said. She ought to have run. She was aware of that, clearly and intellectually, the way you are aware of the structural risks of something you are already inside. But grief had rearranged her sense of danger. She had survived the worst thing, or what she had thought was the worst thing, and something in her had stopped organizing the world around the avoidance of pain. Pain arrived regardless. Better, perhaps, to choose your exposure. She met him every Thursday after that, at the same restaurant by the river. He arranged for her housing to be covered, through a private account whose origins she stopped questioning because the alternative was the notice on her door, and he did not ask for anything in return, which frightened her more than if he had. Men who ask for nothing explicitly are either saints or they are waiting. She was not yet sure which he was. She learned, over weeks of Thursdays, that he had been alone in his own way for a long time. Not poor alone but power alone, the kind of solitude that comes from inhabiting a life that no one is permitted to fully see. She learned that he read novels in 3 languages. She learned that he had a particular, precise humor that appeared rarely and without warning. She learned that he looked at her the way the library light had once fallen across her face in the photograph, not like something to be acquired, but like something he was still in the process of believing was real. And she learned, on a Thursday in April when the cherry trees were white along the river walk, that he was engaged. He told her himself, formally, carefully, as though he had prepared the exact words. A family arrangement. The Park family, old money, political connections, a union that had been expected for years and structured long before either party had much say in it. Park Soo-yeon. Educated, composed, aware of the transactional nature of the arrangement. Not a love match. Not pretended to be one. Are you still engaged to her? Amara asked. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. On paper, he said. The formal ceremony has not taken place. She looked at the white trees, the river below them, the pale evening sky. Then why are you here? She asked quietly. Telling me things you tell me. Looking at me the way you look at me. He was quiet long enough that she turned back to him. Because I intend to end it, he said. I am telling you because you deserve to know. Not because it is comfortable to say. She searched his face for a long time. Then end it, she said. Before this goes any further. If you mean what you've said to me, end it. He held her gaze. I will, he said. She was 20 years old and alone, and the man across the table was looking at her like she was the most real thing in his landscape. She believed him. She wanted to believe him, and she believed him, and those two things are not always different and they are not always the same, and she was not yet experienced enough to know which this was. She was falling in love with him. She made the mistake 2 weeks later of telling Destiny. Destiny had been calling more consistently since January, warm, regular, full of the old easy rhythm of sisterhood that Amara had been grieving almost as deeply as her parents. She called on Wednesday evenings. She asked about school, about Seoul, about Amara's health and her eating and whether she was sleeping. She apologized repeatedly and apparently sincerely. For the money. Things had been impossible. She'd had car trouble. Then a health thing. She was so ashamed. She was sorry. Amara, whose capacity for coldness toward people she loved had always been limited, thawed. She forgave. She opened. She told Destiny about J1 the way you tell a sister, everything or close to everything. The wrong number, the groceries, the dinners by the river. The growing weight of feelings she kept trying to hold at a careful distance and kept failing to. She told her about the engagement, about his promise to end it, about the way he looked at her and the way she felt seen by him in a manner she hadn't expected to feel with anyone. There was a brief silence on Destiny's end of the line. Kim J1, Destiny repeated. You said Kim J1? Yes. Why? Nothing. I googled him while you were talking. Baby, he's... A low sound that might have been a laugh or a breath. Amara, he's serious money. That's not why. I know. I'm just saying. Warmth back in her voice. He clearly sees something in you. He'd be a fool not to. They talked for another hour. Amara felt lighter after the call. It was good, she thought, to have her sister back. It was good to not be carrying this alone. She did not hear, beneath the warmth, the calculation beginning. Destiny arrived in Seoul in June with new luggage and a story about having saved up for a visit. She looked expensive in a way that registered quietly in Amara's mind and was just as quietly set aside. Destiny had always found ways to look like more than she had. It was a talent of hers. She was affectionate and funny and engaged, the best version of herself, and for 2 weeks Amara felt the particular gift of being known, of walking through a foreign city with someone who had eaten at the same table and breathed the same summer air and knew what Cypress Lane smelled like after rain. She showed Destiny everything she loved about Seoul. Itaewon, the Han River, the university campus, the small bookshop near the subway stop where she spent too much money on Korean novels. They ate well, laughed loudly, took photographs at the Cherry Tree Boulevard that was now post-bloom but still beautiful in its green aftermath. Destiny asked on the 5th day about Jae-won. I want to meet him, she said. I want to thank him. He helped my sister. I'm not going to be in Seoul and not acknowledge the man. Amara hesitated. She had kept them separate with an instinct she hadn't fully examined. But the reasoning felt circular in the light of the day, and Destiny's face was open and reasonable, and so she called Jae-won and arranged a dinner, brief, casual, just an introduction. She watched them meet. Jae-won was controlled as he always was, polite, measured, giving nothing away. Destiny was Destiny. Warm and precise and working, though only someone who knew her well would recognize it as work. She made him laugh once, which Amara noted with a complicated pride. He spoke to both of them. The dinner lasted 90 minutes and ended on pleasant terms. On the walk home, Destiny linked her arm through Amara's and said, He's incredibly guarded. You're good for him. You think. Definitely. A pause. He's also, devastatingly attractive, so that doesn't hurt. Amara laughed. Destiny laughed. The night was warm and the city was glittering and she didn't see it. She didn't see it. She found out on a Wednesday evening in August. Never a Thursday, she would notice later. Jae-won had always been precise about his Thursdays. When she went back to a cafe near campus to retrieve a laptop she'd left on the table. The cafe was on the River Road. She passed the restaurant on her way. She was not in the habit of looking in through restaurant windows. She looked in through this one because the light was warm and the evening was cooling and she was in a mild, directionless good mood, the first such mood she'd had in weeks, and good moods made her look at things. She saw them through the glass. Destiny was at the corner table. Their table, hers and Jae-won's, the specific corner with the river view that the staff always held without being asked. She was leaning forward in the way she leaned when she was performing her full self for someone. Chin tilted, one hand on the table, the particular geometry of her posture that meant she was presenting herself like an argument she was certain of winning. Jae-won was across from her. He was looking at Destiny the way still water looks at things dropped into it. Not warmly exactly, but with absolute attention. Present in the complete and focused way Amara recognized because it had once been directed at her. She stood on the pavement while the city moved around her. She did not cry. She did not go in. She stood there for approximately 4 minutes, which felt like something measured in geology, and then she walked back to her dormitory and sat on the floor with her back against her bed and her knees drawn up, the same position she had been in the night she sent the wrong text message, and felt the particular devastation of a pattern completing itself. She confronted Destiny the next morning at the small kitchen table in Amara's dormitory. She was precise and quiet about it, the way she was when she had decided not to survive a conversation on emotion alone. Destiny did not crumble. Amara had perhaps expected crumbling, or at least the shape of remorse. What she got instead was composure, careful, unapologetic, almost philosophical. I didn't go looking for it, Destiny said. It happened. You knew I had feelings for him. Yes. You knew he was engaged. On paper. You said so yourself. The phrase came back like a stone thrown from a great distance and hitting with the full force of its origin. Amara had said those words first. She had given Destiny that door and Destiny had walked through it. He told me he was going to end the formal engagement. He told me. Amara. Destiny's voice was even, not unkind. The absence of kindness would have been easier. Listen to me. He is a man with obligations that existed long before you texted the wrong number. Whatever he said to you about ending things. Men like that say what they need to say in the moment they need to say it. That doesn't mean they don't mean it right then. But it's not a promise you can hold. You are my sister. Something moved across Destiny's face. Brief and unmistakable. But it settled back into composure before it became anything nameable. Yes, she said. And I love you. Don't say that to me right now. It's still true. You came here, Amara said slowly. You came here knowing what you were going to do. You asked me to introduce you to him. She stopped, restarted. Destiny, you made me think this visit was about us. About sisters. And the whole time, it was about us, Destiny said. What happened with J1? Stop saying his name. Happened separately. I'm not going to lie to you and say it isn't real. I won't insult you that way. She would not insult her with a lie, Amara thought. Only with the truth, which was apparently the more durable weapon. She called J1. He answered on the second ring. Is it true? She asked. Nothing else. The silence before he spoke told her everything the words confirmed. Amara. Yes or no? The situation is, yes or no, J1? Yes. She breathed in slowly. And the engagement you were going to end. My obligations are complicated. There are. Did you mean it? When you said you would end it. The longest pause. I meant it when I said it. She understood what that meant. She had perhaps always known, at some level beneath hope, what it would mean if he ever said it. I meant it then is not the same as I mean it now and is even further from I will make it true. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her, and it broke something in her chest that she knew, with the quiet certainty of irreversible things, would not be repaired the same way. Thank you for not lying, she said. She hung up. She finished her degree. Not triumphantly. Not with the clean narrative arc of a person who channels devastation into productive fire. She finished it the way people finish things when there is nothing left to stop for. Steadily, quietly, because stopping meant sitting in the stillness with all of it, and she was not ready to do that. She tutored and she studied and she ate her meals by the Han River in all weathers, and she let Seoul be what it was. Extraordinary and indifferent and entirely unconcerned with her particular small tragedy, which was exactly what she needed it to be. She graduated on a gray April morning. She walked across the stage alone, received her diploma with both hands, bowed, and returned to her seat. In the audience around her, families stood and waved and called out names. She looked at no particular place in the crowd. She held the diploma in her lap and breathed. She heard, later, through the particular cruelty of the internet's long memory, that the formal ceremony between J1 and the park family's daughter had been finalized in October. She heard nothing further about Destiny's part in any of it, and she did not look. Some doors are better faced with your back to them. She did not return to Mississippi immediately. She stayed in Seoul for one more year, teaching English, saving carefully, walking every part of the city she hadn't yet learned, as though she owed it a thorough goodbye. She visited Ms. Brenda's restaurant in Itaewon on her last evening and sat at the counter and ate something close to her mother's cornbread and listened to the Seoul records and let herself, finally, grieve everything at once. Her parents, her sister, the man who had found her in her darkest hour and had not, in the end, chosen to be her light. She cried in the restaurant, which she would have been ashamed of once. Ms. Brenda set a glass of water next to her elbow and said nothing, which was the right thing. She came back to the States in the spring. Atlanta eventually, not for Marcus, who had moved on gently and without drama to a life that suited him, but for a teaching fellowship at a small university that needed someone with her particular combination of language fluency and hard-won knowledge of what it means to be far from home and still standing. She had a small apartment with too many books and a cat she named Han, after the river. She kept her mother's Bible on the nightstand. Its spine cracked further now, its margins full of both her mother's handwriting and her own, the two scripts living side by side on the same pages. She called Auntie Clarice on Sundays. She made cornbread when the world felt too sharp. She taught her students with the specific patience of someone who remembers what it felt like not to understand, and who believes, from evidence, that not understanding is not a permanent condition. She did not call destiny. She was not ready. She was not certain she would ever be. There are some betrayals that don't ask to be resolved. Only witnessed, set down carefully, and walked away from. The walking away is its own kind of grace, even when it doesn't feel like one. She was not unbroken. She had accepted that. She was 23 years old and she had lost her parents and her first love and the sister she thought she knew. And she had learned a language and earned a degree and survived a hunger she hadn't expected to survive. And she was here. Still here. Sitting in the morning light with a cup of tea and a cat in her lap and the day opening in front of her. Uncertain and ordinary in hers. She thought of her father's hands straightening her collar. Of her mother pressing the Bible into her palms. Of the way the Han River looked at 5 in the morning in February. Steel-colored and absolutely untroubled. Moving south with a patience that had nothing to prove. She thought, I am still here. She thought, that is not a small thing. She picked up her tea. She watched the light move. She was still here. Some things break you in ways that don't heal back to what you were. But there is another kind of wholeness, harder one, less symmetrical, built from what survived the breaking. Amara Eloise Johnson, girl from Biloxi, Mississippi, woman of soul, carried hers quietly and without apology. It was enough. It was more than enough.